The plea had been going out for 11 days when the channel finally answered. And by then, the people of the convoy had stopped expecting it to. "This is the refugee convoy Sparrow Line," the message said, again and again, in the worn voice of a woman who had given up on sounding calm. "We carry 38,000 survivors of the Driftworld fall. The pale tide is in our hulls. We have asked the sodality, and they have sealed the lane behind us. We have asked the choir, and they will not come within a light year. We are not asking to be saved. We are asking for one doctor, one healer who is not afraid of the tide, and whatever medicine a ship can spare. That is all. We have children aboard who will not last the month. Please, anyone." On the lead vessel of the convoy, a tired colony hauler named the Reed Lantern, a woman called Lena Calder, sat in the cramped medical bay and listened to the plea go out for what the counter told her was the 800th time, and she did not let herself weep, because weeping cost water, and water was for the sick. Lena was not a soldier. She had never held a weapon in her life. She was a field medic, trained in a colony clinic that no longer stood, and for 11 days she had been the one thing standing between 38,000 people and the pale tide, and she was losing, because the pale tide did not lose. It was not a sickness the way other species understood sickness. It was a living thing, a creeping growth that drifted between the stars as fine pale spores, and took root in anything warm and damp and breathing, and in the metal of ships as well, threading soft white tendrils through bulkheads and through lungs alike, patient and quiet and total. It had a way of looking almost gentle at the end, a pale, soft shroud spreading over everything it had finished killing, and that was where it got its name. The Driftworld had fallen to it in 40 days. A whole world, 300 million souls, gone under the tide, while the great powers of the region watched from a safe distance and called it a containment event. The Sparrow Line was what had gotten out. 212 civilian ships welded and lashed together into a single crawling chain, running for a border that kept moving away from them. Every ship in the chain was infected now, some worse than others. The medics did what they could, which was to cut and burn and seal and move the worst cases to the cold dead ships at the back of the line, where the tide grew slower in the chill, and to pretend, when a parent asked, that there was a plan. There was no plan. There was only Lena and 40 other healers, and a dwindling stock of the one compound that slowed the tide, a silver fluid the colonies had called bright water, and they were nearly out of it. Lena had been on the Driftworld when it fell. She had worked a clinic in one of its cities, setting bones and treating the ordinary illnesses of an ordinary world, until the spores came down out of the upper air, and the world asked for help and got the same answer the convoy was getting now. The sodality had drawn a quarantine line and called the Driftworld a containment event. The choir had moved its ships away. The world had fallen, town by town, while its own neighbors watched from a safe distance and called the watching prudence, and Lena had carried what she could onto the last hauler off the ground and become a refugee. She had decided, somewhere over the ruin of her green world, that if she ever got the chance, she would spend the rest of her life being the kind of person who did not look away, because she had seen exactly what the looking away cost, and the cost had a number, and she would carry it forever. Calder, the voice belonged to the convoy's chief administrator, a heavy-set older man named Boyd Aldercott, who had been a port official before the fall, and now held the whole crawling chain together, with nothing but a calm voice and a refusal to sleep. He stood in the hatch of the medical bay, gray with exhaustion, and he did not come in, because the bay was full. How long on the bright water? 6 days, Lena said. Maybe 7 if I cut the doses again. After that, the tide moves at its own speed, and I can only watch it. Aldercott closed his eyes. And the back ships. The back ships are coffins, Boyd. We send people there to die slow instead of fast. That is the whole of what I can offer. Cold instead of quick. She wiped her hands on a rag that had stopped being clean days ago. Has anyone answered the call? Anyone at all? The sodality answered, Aldercott said. They wished us a peaceful crossing, and reminded us that their border is closed under quarantine law, and that any ship that approaches it will be destroyed for the good of the wider region. The choir did not answer in words. They moved their picket ships further out. I think that was their answer. Aldercott left to walk the chain again, and Lena went back to the work, because the work did not stop for bad news. The work was not healing, not really. The work was choosing. 11 days of choosing who got the bright water and who got moved to the back ships, with a dwindling supply and far too many threads spreading under far too much skin, and the choosing did not get easier with practice. It only built up inside a person, layer on layer, like the bloom built up on a wall. It was a terrible system, and it was the only one she had, and she used it anyway, because a frozen medic killed more people than a cruel one. Earlier that same day, she had lost a man named Corwin, a freighter pilot who had carried 60 people off the drift world in a hull built for cargo, and had taken the tide doing it. He had refused the bright water for 9 days, pointing every time at someone younger, saying, "Give it to that one, I had my run." His last clear words had been to ask whether the 60 had made it. Lena had told him they had. It was even true. And then she had stood in the supply closet in the dark for the length of 3 breaths, which was all the time she could spare, and come back out and gone on with the choosing. Lena looked down at the woman on the table in front of her, a colonist in her 30s with the first pale threads showing under the skin of her forearm, fine and white and branching like frost on a window. The woman was awake. She was watching Lena's face to see what it would do. Lena made her face do nothing. The colonist on the table reached out with her clean hand and caught Lena's wrist. "I have heard the call going out," she said. 800 times, you said. Has anyone answered it? Even once." Lena thought about lying. It would have been kinder, in the short run, but she had stopped lying to her patients on the 3rd day, after she watched what the lies did when they came undone, and she had decided that whatever else the tide took from these people, it would not take the truth from them, not while she was the one holding it. "Not yet," she said. "But the call is not for the powers, not really. The powers heard it on the 1st day and made their choice. The call is for whoever is out there beyond the powers, listening, who has not made their choice yet. That is who I am sending it to. Somebody who has not decided yet what 38,000 people are worth. And if there is no such somebody," the colonist said, "if everyone out there has already decided." Lena set the woman's clean hand back down gently on the table. "Then I will be here anyway," she said. "Until the last day, I will be here, and you will not be alone in it. And that is the one thing I can promise no matter who answers. The tide does not get to make us face it alone. That is the one thing it cannot take, and I will not give it to them." She looked at the woman until the woman looked back. "Now your arm. The threads have not reached your elbow yet, which means there is still time to slow it, and I have a dose with your name on it, because you are young, and you are fighting, and that is exactly who the dose is for. Hold still." She gave the woman the bright water, the silver fluid threading cold into the vein, and she watched the woman's face ease, and she did not let herself think about the dose she had just spent, or about the man 2 cots over who would not get one because of it, or about the arithmetic of mercy that she had been doing in her head for 11 days, and that no amount of practice made bearable. She did the work. The work was the only thing that did not lie. "Then we keep sending the call," she said, to Aldecott, who had paused at the hatch to listen. "Somebody out there is not the sodality, and not the choir. Somebody out there will hear 38,000 people asking for one doctor and decide that is not too much to give." Aldecott did not say what they both knew, which was that everybody in the region had heard the call already, and everybody in the region had decided exactly how much the Sparrow line was worth to them, and the answer had been nothing. The great powers did not come into the tide. That was the rule of the region, written in the ash of every world the tide had taken. You did not go toward the pale tide, you ran from it, and you sealed the door behind you. And if there were people on the wrong side of the door, that was a sorrow, but it was not a reason to open the door. So the call went out, again, into the dark, in the worn voice of a woman who had stopped expecting an answer. And 11 days after it started, on the far side of the dead system the Sparrow line was crawling through, something heard it. The first sign was on the convoy's old long-range scope, which the techs kept running mostly out of habit, because there had been nothing worth seeing on it for weeks. A single contact slid into the edge of it, coming in from the deep on a hard straight line, not slowing, not circling, not doing any of the careful things a ship did when it was afraid of the tide. It came on as though the tide were not there at all. The duty tech, a young man named Pram who had been a fisheries student before the fall, stared at the contact for a long moment, then keyed the medical bay. Calder, Calder, you need to see this. Something is coming in. One ship. It is big. It is really big. And it is not slowing down. And it is heading straight for us. Lena left the colonist on the table to the next medic, and went forward through the lashed-together hulls, through corridors crowded with sleeping families and stacked supplies, and the soft pale bloom that had begun, here and there, to show at the corners of the ceilings, where no one had time to burn it back. She reached the reed lantern's cramped bridge, and put her hands on the back of Pram's chair, and looked at the scope. The contact filled it. Whatever it was larger than anything in the convoy by an order of magnitude, larger than the Driftworld's old orbital docks had been, and it was driving straight in toward the chain with the unhurried confidence of a thing that had decided where it was going a long time ago. "Is it the Sodality?" Lena said. "Have they come to destroy us after all? For the good of the region?" "No," Aldecott said from the hatch. He had come up behind her, and he was looking at the scope with an expression she had not seen on him in 11 days, an expression she had almost forgotten the shape of. "The Sodality would have hailed us first. They like to read you the law before they fire. This one has not said a word." Then the contact said a word. It came across the open channel the convoy had been begging on, the same channel that had carried the plea 800 times into silence, and it was a human voice, a woman's, steady and plain and entirely without fear. "Sparrow Line, this is the relief ship Long Mercy, out of Earth," the voice said. "We heard you. We have been coming for 9 days. I am sorry it took us that long. Stand by your sick, and hold your line. We are bringing you more than one doctor." For a moment, no one on the bridge of the reed lantern could speak. Pram's mouth was open. Aldecott had a hand pressed flat against the hatch frame, as if he needed it to stay upright. Lena leaned toward the panel, and her voice, when it came out, was not steady at all. "Long Mercy, this is Medic Lena Calder of the Sparrow Line. We have 38,000 people, and we are 6 days from the last of our medicine. Please tell me what you mean by more than one doctor. Please tell me you understand what is in our hulls. The pale tide is in our walls and our lungs, and there is no cure. There has never been a cure. The whole region runs from it. Whatever you are bringing, you need to understand what it will do to your ship the moment you come close." There was a short pause, and when the woman from the Long Mercy answered, there was something underneath the steadiness now, something dry and almost warm. "Medic Calder," she said, "we understand the tide better than the people who named it. The tide is exactly why they sent this ship, and this ship is exactly why I am not afraid of it. Hold your line, we will be alongside you in 4 hours, and the tide is going to have a very bad day." 4 hours was a long time to wait for a miracle, when you had already learned not to believe in them. Lena spent the 4 hours the only way she knew how, which was working. She went ship to ship along the chain in a patched suit, through the airlocks and the lashing tubes, checking the worst of the worst, and everywhere she went, the word ran ahead of her faster than she could walk. "A ship is coming. A human ship. It heard us. It is bringing more than one doctor." She watched the word land on people who had not had any good news in 11 days, and she watched what it did to them, and it frightened her, because she did not know yet whether the news was true, and she had seen what false hope did to a dying person. It was worse than no hope at all. No hope let a person go quietly. False hope made them fight, and then the fighting was for nothing. So she did not promise anyone anything. She said, "A ship is coming, and we will see." She said it to a man whose wife had the tide in both lungs. She said it to a girl of 9, named Posey, who had a pale thread starting under her left eye, and who asked Lena, very seriously, whether the human ship had real doctors, or just more people like Lena who tried hard and were sorry. Lena did not have a good answer for that one. She held the girl's hand and said, "We will see," and went on. She passed through the convoy's central hauler on her rounds, the old ship they called the Common, where the children were kept, all the orphans the Driftworld fall had made, gathered into one place because it was easier to feed and watch them together. There were nearly 400 of them, and they had a caretaker, a former schoolteacher named Win Patel, who had appointed herself to the job because someone had to, and Win met Lena at the hatch with the careful flat face of a woman holding too much. "Is it true?" Win said quietly, so the children would not hear. "A ship is coming. They are saying a ship is coming." A ship is coming, Lena said. I have heard it with my own ears, Win. A human ship, out of Earth. It hailed us. It says it is bringing more than one doctor. More than one doctor, Win repeated, and her flat face cracked, just at the edges. Lena, I have 11 children in this room, with the tide in them. 11. I have been telling them stories so they do not feel it growing. I have run out of stories. If this ship is not real, if it does not come, I do not know what I am going to do, because I have nothing left to tell them. Then tell them the truth, Lena said. Tell them a ship is coming. That is a true story now. Hold that one. I will be back the moment it arrives, and I will bring a real doctor to this room before I bring one anywhere else. That is a promise. She did not know yet whether she could keep it, but she had learned, in 11 days, that a promise made to a room full of frightened children was a different kind of debt than any other, and that you did not make it unless you intended to die keeping it. So she made it, and she went on, and she carried the weight of it forward with all the other weights, and she told herself that the ship would come, because she could not afford to tell herself anything else. When the Long Mercy came alongside, the whole convoy felt it before they saw it. There was no roar, no shudder, none of the violence Lena had braced for. There was a slow change in the light. The dead system they were crawling through had one cold sun far off, and that thin red light had been the only light the convoy had for weeks, and then the red light dimmed, the way a room dims when a tall person stands in front of the lamp, and Lena went to the nearest viewport and looked out and forgot, for a moment, how to breathe. The Long Mercy was not a ship the way the convoy ships were. It was a ship the way a mountain is a hill. It hung off the convoy's flank, a long white spine of a vessel 3 kilometers from bow to stern, and it was the cleanest thing Lena had seen in her life. Every other surface in her world was streaked with the gray and the pale of the tide. The Long Mercy was white the way bone is white the way the inside of a shell is white, and not one thread of the tide grew anywhere on it. Along its flanks ran rows of soft amber lights, hundreds of them, in long, even lines, and Lena realized after a moment that the lights were windows, and that behind each window was a room, and that the ship was not built to carry weapons in those rows, but to carry people. It was a hospital. Earth had sent a hospital the size of a city. But it was not only a hospital, and Lena saw the rest of it as the great hull turned its flank to the convoy and held station with a gentleness that something 3 kilometers long had no right to. Set into the white spine, spaced along its length, were broad, dark ports, and from the ports came a pale blue glow, steady and cold, and the glow was aimed outward, into the dark all around the convoy. And where it touched the drifting clouds of tide spores that hung in the space between the ships, the spores died. Lena watched it happen. The spores were too small to see one by one, but in their billions, they made the dark between the convoy hulls faintly milky, a haze you learned to stop noticing, and where the blue glow swept across that haze the milk cleared, and the dark went clean and black and empty. The Long Mercy was not afraid of the tide, because the Long Mercy was killing the tide simply by being there. "Pipe rattle line," the steady voice said, on the open channel, and now the whole convoy could hear it, 38,000 people in their crowded corridors all going still at once. "This is Captain Elise Marrow of the relief ship Long Mercy. I am going to tell you what is about to happen so that no one is afraid of it. This ship carries a field generator. The colonies on the far side of the tide developed 20 years ago, after the first worlds fell. It projects a band of light that the tide cannot live in. We have been refining it for 2 decades. It does not harm people, animals, plants, or machines. It harms only the tide. You will see it as a blue glow. While that glow is on, the tide in the open space around you is dying, and the tide in your hulls is dying, slowly, from the outside in. It is not instant. Nothing about the tide is instant. But starting now, for the first time in 11 days, the thing in your walls is losing ground, instead of gaining it. In 1 hour, we will begin taking your sick aboard, worst cases first. We have 11,000 beds, and 1,000 staff, and enough bright water to bathe every hull in your convoy. No one is going to be left in a coffin ship. No one is going to die slow in the cold, so that someone else can die fast. That is not how this works anymore. That ended the moment we came over the horizon. I know what you have been told about your worth. I know the sodality sealed the lane, and the choir backed away. I want you to understand something, Sparrow Line, and I want the sodality and the choir to understand it too, because I am broadcasting this in the open on every band, so they are hearing it as well. We came 9 days through the deep for 38,000 people that everyone else had written off. We will tell you plainly why. It is because 38,000 people is not a small number to us. There is no number of people that is a small number to us. That is the whole of it. That is the entire reason. Stand by. Help is here. Lena found that she was sitting down on the deck under the viewport and that her face was wet, and that for the first time in 11 days she had let the water go. The next hours were a kind she would never forget. The Long Mercy did not make the convoy come to it. It came to the convoy. It launched broad flat tenders, white like the parent ship, each one trailing the same blue glow, and the tenders nosed up to the convoy hulls one by one, and married to the airlocks, and human medics in clean white suits came through, dozens of them, and they were not afraid. That was the thing Lena could not get over. They walked into corridors thick with the bloom, and they did not flinch. They carried hand units that put out the same blue light, smaller versions of the great glow, and where they walked the bloom on the walls curled and browned and died and fell away in soft pale flakes, and the corridors behind them were cleaner than they had been in weeks. The first ship the human crews cleared completely was a small hauler called the Tinder, near the front of the chain, and Lena happened to be aboard it when the last of the bloom died on its walls, and she watched the people of the Tinder come out of their cabins into corridors that were clean for the first time in 11 days. They moved carefully at first. The way you move in a place you are afraid is a dream. A woman ran her hand along a bulkhead that had been gray with the tide that morning and was bare honest metal now, and she did it again, and again, as though she could not trust the first touch. An old man stood in the middle of the corridor and breathed, just breathed, long slow breaths of air that no longer carried the faint dusty smell of spores, and tears ran down his face while he did it, and he was not ashamed of them, and no one around him was ashamed of theirs. Lena stood at the end of the corridor and watched a whole ship of people remember what it was to breathe without fear, and she thought that she had never in her life seen anything she would rather have seen. A human medic found Lena where she was working, an hour later, in the deepest part of the Reed Lantern's Bay with the hardest cases, and he was a broad, calm man named Gideon Tarr, and he looked at what she had been doing with the little she had, the careful triage, the rationed bright water, the rows of patients held just barely on the right side of the line, for 11 days with almost nothing, and he stood quiet for a moment. "You did this with no field generator and almost no bright water," he said, "for 11 days, 38,000 people, and you held the line." "I lost 109, Lena said. "I counted every one." "You held 38,000, Gideon said, "with nothing. Where I trained, they teach a number for what a field medic can hold against an active tide bloom with your supplies. The number is 0. You are not supposed to be able to do this at all." He shook his head slowly. "Captain Marrow is going to want to meet you. But first, let us get your people aboard. Show me your worst. I will believe whatever you tell me. You have earned that." So Lena showed him her worst, and the worst were carried, gently, on clean white stretchers, through the lashing tubes and into the tenders, and away into the great white hull, where there were beds and bright water, and the blue glow that the tide could not live in. She carried the man whose wife had the tide in both lungs, and she carried, herself, the girl named Posy, with the pale thread under her eye, and she stayed with the girl all the way into the Long Mercy, because she had promised, somewhere along the way without quite saying it out loud, that she would. Inside, the Long Mercy was a clean, bright country. The corridors were wide and full of soft amber light, and the air smelled of nothing, which after 11 days of the convoy's air was the most wonderful smell Lena had ever breathed. The wards went on and on. Human staff moved among them without hurry and without fear, and the blue glow lived in the walls themselves, woven through the whole ship, so that the tide could not so much as gain a foothold. Lena watched a tech run a hand unit over the pale thread under Posy's eye, and watched the thread brown and shrivel and lift away in a flake the size of an eyelash, and watched the clean skin under it, and had to turn away because her eyes had gone wet again. "It will take a few days to clear it from her fully," the tech said kindly. "The tide hides deep, but the glow has it now. It does not let go. She is going to be fine. They are all going to be fine. All going to be fine. Lena turned the words over and could not make them feel real. For 11 days, the only words she had been allowed to use were words like maybe, and slower, and cold, instead of quick. Going to be fine was a phrase from another life. She kept her promise to win Patel before she did anything else. She found Gideon Tarr in the corridor and told him about the room full of children and the 11 with the tide in them. And Gideon did not hesitate, did not finish what he was doing first, did not say in a moment. He gathered 4 of his medics and a cart of hand units and Brightwater, and he followed Lena to the common at a near run, and when the hatch opened on the room where 400 orphans sat in the gray light, Lena watched the human medics take in the scene, the rows of children, the 11 with the pale threads showing, the schoolteacher who had run out of stories, and she watched something move across Gideon's broad, calm face that he did not bother to hide. "All right," he said, kneeling down to the level of the nearest child, a boy of perhaps 6, who flinched from the stranger out of habit. "My name is Gideon. I came on the big white ship. I am going to show you something, and it does not hurt. I promise you, it does not hurt. It only tickles a little." He ran the hand unit slowly over the boy's arm, where a pale thread had begun, and the thread browned and curled and lifted away in a flake, and the boy stared at his own clean arm, and then up at Gideon, with an expression that Lena would remember for the rest of her life, the expression of a child learning, for the first time in his short, hard life, that an adult could make a true promise and keep it in the same breath. "There," Gideon said. "See, tickles. Who is next? I have all day, and there is plenty for everyone, and nobody in this room is going to be sick by tonight." Win Patel stood against the far wall with both hands pressed to her mouth, and Lena went and stood beside her, and the 2 women watched the human medics move through the room of children, unhurried and unafraid, the blue glow of the hand units passing over arm after arm, and Win said, in a voice that barely held together, "You kept it. You said you would bring a doctor to this room first, and you kept it." And Lena said, "I told you it was a true story now." And the 2 of them stood there and watched the truth of it spread across the room, one child at a time. On her way to the command deck, Lena passed through what the crew called the receiving hall, a wide, bright space just inside the main tender dock where the convoy's people came aboard, and she stopped, because she could not make herself walk past it. The Sparrow line had been a place of held breath for 11 days, a place where you did not look too long at anyone, because looking too long meant counting, and counting meant grief, and grief cost water. And here, in the receiving hall, the held breath was letting go. Families that had been welded into separate hulls for 11 days were finding each other across the bright floor. A man she did not know was on his knees, with his arms around 2 children, all 3 of them shaking. An old woman was sitting in a clean chair, a real chair, with a cup of warm water in her hands, weeping quietly, while a human staffer crouched beside her and said nothing at all, only stayed, because sometimes staying was the whole of the medicine. A human crewwoman with a kind, broad face came up beside Lena and followed her gaze across the hall. "First time aboard a relief ship," she said. It was not a question. "You get used to the wards and the generator. You never get used to the hall. There is a name for what people do when they have been holding on so long they forgot they were holding, and then suddenly they are allowed to stop. We just call it the hall. It means they made it, and their body is only now finding out." She watched the man on his knees with the 2 children. Nobody tells you when you sign on that it is worth it. They are afraid of sounding simple, but it is. You have been carrying these people with nothing for a long time, and you are about to put the weight down, and the putting down is going to hurt almost as much as the carrying did, and then it is going to be the best thing that ever happened to you. She moved off, and Lena stood a moment longer, watching the held breath let go across the bright floor, and then she went to find the captain. She found Captain Elise Marrow on the command deck of the Long Mercy, 2 hours later, and the captain was not what Lena had pictured. She had pictured a tall, fierce woman, an admiral out of a poster. Marrow was small and gray-haired, and looked tired in the bone-deep way Aldercott looked tired, the way of someone who carried other people's lives, and had been doing it a long time. She turned from the great forward window, where the convoy hung in the blue-lit dark with its bloom dying off it ship by ship, and she looked at Lena, and the first thing she said was not about the ship or the tide. "You are Calder," Gideon told me. 11 days, 38,000, no generator. She said it the way you say the name of a place you respect. Sit down before you fall down, medic. You have not slept in a week, and I can see it from here. Lena sat. Captain, I need to understand something. I need to understand it so I do not lose my mind. The whole region runs from the tide. The sodality, the choir, every great power for 100 light years. They have ships 10 times the strength of ours, and they will not come near a bloom. And Earth sends a hospital 3 kilometers long straight into the heart of one. Why? Why is your kind not afraid of the thing that everyone else in this region is afraid of? Marrow was quiet for a moment, looking out at the dying bloom. Because we have done this before, she said. Not the tide, but the shape of it. A thing too big to fight, that everyone agrees you must run from, that takes worlds while the powers call it a containment event, and seal the door. We met things like that before we ever left Earth. The powerful always have the same answer, in every age. Seal the door, write off the rest, with sorrow. And there is always, every time, a smaller number of people who look at the sealed door and at the ones left on the wrong side of it, and decide it is going to open whether the powerful like it or not. This ship is the door-opening Calder. That is all it is. We have been on the wrong side of a sealed door too many times in our history to ever be the ones who seal it. Lena did not have anything to say to that. She did not think there was anything to say to it. It was at that moment that the Long Mercy's sensor officer, a young man at a forward station, straightened in his seat and said, in the careful flat voice of someone who does not want to sound alarmed, Captain, we have new contacts. Coming in fast from the closed lane. Multiple. They are sodality. Marrow turned to the window. So did Lena. Out past the convoy, past the blue glow, ships were sliding into the dead system in a wide formation, lean and silver and sharp-prowed, the warships of a power that had sealed a lane and called it law. They came on hard, and they did not glow blue, because they carried nothing that killed the tide. They carried the other kind of weapon, and they were placing themselves between the Long Mercy and the closed border, a wall of silver hulls, more of them sliding in every minute. How many? Marrow said. 40 so far, the sensor officer said. More crossing in. Make it 60. They are forming a blockade line. Captain, we are being hailed. The sodality voice that came onto the command deck was smooth and cold and certain of itself, the voice of a power that had never in living memory been told no. Earth vessel Long Mercy, it said. You have entered a region under sodality quarantine. You have made contact with a contaminated convoy that this body has lawfully condemned. You will now do the following. You will return the persons you have taken aboard to their condemned vessels. You will withdraw your ship from the quarantine zone. And you will surrender your tide suppression technology to this body for proper regional management. You have 1 hour to comply, refuse, and we will treat your ship as a contaminated vessel under quarantine law, which is to say, we will destroy it, with everyone aboard, for the good of the wider region. The choice, Earth vessel, is yours. The command deck of the Long Mercy went very quiet. Lena looked at Captain Marrow, this small, gray, tired woman, and waited, with the cold settling back into her chest, for the hope to be taken away again, because that was what the region did. That was the rule. You did not get to keep the good thing. The powerful always came, in the end, to seal the door. But Marrow was not afraid. Lena could see it. The captain looked at the wall of 60 silver ships forming up between her hospital and the border, and what crossed her tired face was not fear at all. It was something closer to weariness, and underneath the weariness, something hard and old and patient, the look of someone who has had this exact conversation before, in some form, in some age, and knows already how it ends. Sensor officer, Marrow said, open a channel to the sodality blockade, wideband. I want the choir hearing this too, and I want the convoy hearing it, and I want it on the record back home. She straightened, and for a moment she did not look small or tired at all, and signal the Bright Province. Tell them their hour has come early. Sodality blockade, Captain Marrow said, into the open channel, and her plain voice went out across the dead system on every band at once. This is Elise Marrow, of the Long Mercy. I am going to answer you in order, so there is no confusion later about what was said. You asked me to return the people I have taken aboard to their condemned ships. The answer is no. There are 9,000 of them aboard already, and more coming every minute, and not one of them is going back into the bloom. You ask me to withdraw from the quarantine zone. The answer is no. I have 29,000 people still in that convoy, and I am not leaving until every one of them is clean. You ask me to surrender our suppression technology to your management. The answer is no, and I will tell you exactly why. 20 years ago, when the tide first crossed into this region and the first world started to fall, the colonies that built this technology offered it to your body, freely. They asked for nothing. They wanted only that the great powers help fight the tide together, so that no more worlds would fall. Your body studied the offer for 3 years, and then declined it, on the grounds that a suppression field that worked would end the quarantine economy your border officers had built around the tide, the tolls, the salvage rights, the resettlement contracts. You decided that the tide was more profitable as a thing to be feared than as a thing to be cured. So you sealed the lanes and called it law, and you let the worlds fall, and you grew rich on the fear of a thing you could have ended. We know all of this because the colonies told us when we arrived in this region. We are new here. We came because we heard a convoy begging for one doctor, and we followed the call in. And the more we learned on the way, the clearer it became that the tide is not the worst thing in this region. The tide is only a plant. It does what a plant does. It grows toward warmth, and it has no malice in it. You are the worst thing in this region, Sodality, because you had the cure offered to you for free, and you chose the fear instead, and you have spent 20 years selling the door you keep sealed. So here is my answer to all 3 of your demands. Together. No. And now I am going to give you a demand of my own, and you are going to find it is a different kind of conversation than the ones you are used to. The Sodality voice came back, and the smoothness had a brittle edge in it now, the edge of a thing not used to being talked to this way. Earth vessel, you have 60 warships at your throat, and you are a hospital. You have no weapons. Our scans are very clear. Your hull carries beds, and a suppression field, and nothing else. You are in no position to make demands. You will comply, or you will be destroyed, and your suppression technology recovered from the wreck. The choice does not change because you are angry. You scanned my ship, Marrow said. Good. Scan it again. Scan the space behind it. There was a pause. Lena, watching the great forward window, saw the sensor officer's hands move across his board, and saw a small, tight smile cross his face. And then she looked out at the dark behind the Long Mercy, where there had been nothing but the cold red sun and the empty deep, and she watched the deep stop being empty. They came out of the dark the way a coastline comes out of fog, all at once, and far larger than the eye had been prepared for. The Long Mercy had not come into the tide alone. It had come as the front of a column, and the column had hung back in the deep, dark and silent, running cold, while the hospital went forward to do its work, and now the column lit its drives, and the dead system filled with light. They were warships, and they were nothing like the lean silver hulls of the Sodality. They were heavy and broad, and built without elegance, gray as old iron, scarred and welded and plain, the ships of a people who built for the long fight, and not for the parade ground. There were many of them. Lena tried to count and lost the count past 30 and gave up, because they kept coming, sliding out of the deep in a wide curved wall that folded slowly around the Sodality blockade from behind, so that the 60 silver ships that had formed up to trap the hospital found themselves, in the space of 2 minutes, with a gray wall at their own backs. And at the center of the gray wall came the largest of them, a hull longer than the Long Mercy, and twice as massive, blunt and dark and bristling, and along its flank, in plain lettering large enough to read across the dead system, was its name, the Bright Province. Sodality blockade, Marrow said, and her voice had not changed at all, still plain, still calm. You are now between a hospital you did not let yourself be afraid of, and a fleet you did not know was there. This is the rest of what we brought. We do not send a hospital into a region like this one without an escort, because we have learned, over a very long time, what happens to the people who run toward the burning thing if no one is watching their back. The hospital is what we are. The escort is what protects what we are. You are looking at both halves of us now. I will tell you about the ships you are looking at, because your scans are going to confuse you. They are confusing your scans right now. I can see it from here. Your scans say those ships are too heavily built for their drive output, that they carry too much armor and too few weapons to make sense, that the numbers do not add up. The numbers do not add up because you are reading them as warships built to win battles. They are not. They are warships built so that battles do not happen. Every one of those hulls is armored past all reason and armed past all need, because their whole purpose is to stand in front of a hospital and be so plainly, so overwhelmingly impossible to defeat that no one ever tries. A weapon you have to use has already failed at its job. The Bright Province has never fired on a living ship. It does not intend to start today. It only intends to be looked at. On the command deck, the sensor officer spoke quietly, for Marrow alone, though Lena was close enough to hear. Captain, the Sodality blockade is holding position, but their weapon ports just cycled down. All of them. They are reading the Bright Province's armor profile, and they are doing the math. Let them do the math, Marrow said. That is what the math is for. They build blades, Calder. We built a wall. Blades break on walls, and they have known it since the moment the gray ships lit their drives. They are not going to attack a hull they cannot afford to scratch. They are only looking for a way to leave that does not look like running. And we are going to be gracious about it, because a cornered power that cannot save face is the only kind that does something foolish. And I did not bring a hospital full of saved children into the middle of this to let anyone do something foolish. Down in the convoy, on the Reed Lantern's cramped bridge, Boyd Aldercott was watching the same picture on the same open band, and the techs around him had gone silent, and Pram, the young fisheries student who had been first to see the Long Mercy on the scope, said softly, to no one, "There are so many of them. Where were they? Where were they the whole time?" And Aldercott, who had spent 11 days holding a dying chain together with nothing but a calm voice, found that the calm had finally broken, not into fear, but into something he had no name for, and he put his hand flat on the panel the way he had when the first hail came, and he said, "They were coming, son. The whole time we were begging, they were coming. They just had further to come than anyone who was close enough to help was willing to travel." And then he said something he had not let himself say in 11 days, looking at the gray wall folding around the silver one. "We are going to live. Do you understand me? After all of it, we are going to live." The Sodality voice came back, and the brittleness had cracked all the way through now, and underneath it was a thing the Sodality voice had clearly not made in a very long time. It was the sound of a power that had just understood it was not the strongest thing in the room. "Earth vessel, this is a quarantine zone under regional law. The deployment of a war fleet into a quarantine zone is a violation of every treaty this region holds. You cannot simply bring a fleet into our space and surround a lawful blockade. The region will not stand for it. The choir will not stand for it. There will be consequences." "There will," Marrow agreed. "Let us talk about the consequences. Right now, on every band, the whole region is watching this. The convoy is watching. The choir is watching, from wherever they backed away to. And what they are all watching is very simple. They are watching a hospital clean a convoy that you condemned, while you tried to stop it, and they are watching a fleet stand between you and that hospital without firing a single shot. That is the picture, Sodality. That is what goes into the record. For 20 years you have sold the region the idea that the tide cannot be beaten, and that running is the only wisdom. And tonight, in front of everyone, a ship is beating it, and you tried to make it stop. Here is your consequence. Every world in this region that has been paying your tolls and your quarantine fees and your resettlement contracts is, at this moment, watching the fear you sold them die in real time. You did not just fail to stop one hospital. You showed 100 worlds that the thing they were afraid of was a plant, and that the cure existed the whole time, and that the only reason they did not have it was you. You will not need us to bring you consequences, Sodality. Your own region will bring them. We just had to turn the light on." The silence on the channel after that was very long. Into that silence, unexpectedly, a third voice came. It was not the Sodality, and it was not human. It was thinner and stranger, a layered sound like several speakers at once, slightly out of step, and the sensor officer identified it before it had finished its first word. It was the choir, the power that had moved its picket ships further out, and called that its answer. The choir had been listening on the open band like everyone else, and now, with the whole region watching, The choir had decided to be heard. "Earth vessel Long Mercy," the layered voice said. "This is the choir. We wish it noted, on the open record, that the choir did not participate in the blockade now dispersing. We wish it further noted that the choir, upon review, finds the sodality quarantine measures to have been excessive. We wish it noted that the choir did welcome discussions regarding the suppression technology you carry." "Noted," Marrow said, and there was something dry in the single word that made even the tired censor officer smile. "I will note all of it. I will note that the choir backed away from a begging convoy at the start and discovered its conscience only after a fleet arrived and the cameras were running. I am not saying that to shame you, choir. I am saying it so that you understand we saw it, and the region saw it, and you cannot unback away now by being polite to me on an open channel. If you want the technology, you may have it, freely, as the colonies have always offered it. But you will have to earn back the trust of your own worlds, and that is a longer road than a single broadcast, and you started down it about 10 minutes too late to look brave." The choir did not answer that. There was nothing it could say to it. And Lena, listening, understood that this too was part of the thing she was watching, that the comeuppance was not only for the sodality, that every power in the region that had run from the begging convoy was being measured now, in front of everyone, against the one ship that had not run, and was being found wanting, and knew it. Lena stood at the great window and watched the two walls, silver and gray, hang motionless around the blue-lit convoy, and she understood that she was watching the exact moment a thing turned over. She had spent 11 days inside the rule of the region, the rule that said the powerful sealed the door, and the weak died behind it, and that was simply how things were. And here was the rule breaking, in front of her, broadcast on every band, not with a battle, with a fleet that had come so far and stood so plainly that the battle could not happen, and a hospital that had simply refused to believe that 38,000 people were a containment event. "Captain Marrow," Lena said quietly, "they are not going to fire, are they?" "No," Marrow said. "They are going to leave. In a few minutes, when they have found a way to call it their own decision instead of a retreat, they are going to peel off that blockade line and slide back through their lane and seal it behind them, and they are going to spend the next year explaining to their own worlds why they tried to stop the ship that cured the tide. That is the whole of the fight, medic. There is no other part coming. We did the fighting in the building of the ships, years ago, so that nobody would have to do it here." She looked at Lena, and the hard old patient thing in her tired face had eased a little. "Go back to your people, Calder. The hard part of your day is over. The hard part of ours never really started. Go and tell a girl with a pale thread under her eye that she is going to be fine, and this time you are allowed to mean it." The sodality blockade broke apart 11 minutes later, exactly the way Marrow had said it would. It did not look like a retreat, because the sodality were careful to make sure it did not. A new voice came on the channel, an older one, an officer who outranked the first, and it announced that the sodality, having reviewed the situation, and in the interest of regional stability, had determined that the Long Mercy's humanitarian operation could be permitted to continue under observation, and that the quarantine boundary would be adjusted accordingly. It was a long speech, and it used the word lawful many times, and it never once used the word leaving. And while it talked, the 60 silver ships peeled off their blockade line one by one and slid back toward the closed lane, and the gray wall of human warships opened a wide, unhurried gap to let them go, and did not fire, and did not gloat, and simply watched them out. "They will tell their worlds they granted us permission," the censor officer said. "Let them," Marrow said. "The worlds watched the whole thing on the open band. They know what permission looks like, and they know what this looked like, and the two do not match. We do not need the sodality to admit anything. We only need the region to have seen." She turned from the window. "Now, we still have 29,000 people in that convoy. Let us go get them." What followed was the work, and the work was the whole point. The Long Mercy and its tenders settled in among the convoy hulls like a parent gathering scattered children, and for 2 days and 2 nights the cleansing went on without stopping. The blue glow swept the dark between the ships until the milky haze of spores was gone and the space ran clean and black. The tenders married to airlock after airlock, and the human medics went in, unafraid, with their hand units and their stretchers and their endless, steady patience. And ship by ship, The balloon died on the walls and fell away in pale flakes that the cleaning crews swept up and burned, and ship by ship the convoy went from gray to clean. There was a rhythm to the cleansing that Lena found was a kind of healing in itself, not for the patients but for her. The human crews did not rush. For 11 days she had moved at a dead run, because slowing down had meant someone died. The human crews moved steadily, room by room, and they did not triage in the cruel way Lena had been triaging, because they did not have to. They had enough. That was the whole of the difference, and watching them not have to choose was, for Lena, like watching a wound she had not known she carried begin to close. She cleared one of the worst hulls with a human medic named Sephi, and in the third room, they found a family Lena knew, a mother and 3 children, all 4 of them the kind of case Lena had marked on the second day as too far gone to save with what she had. Sephi did not mark them too far gone. Sephi cleared all 4 in 10 minutes and called a tender, and Lena stood in the empty room afterward and had to put her hand against the wall. "I marked them," she said, "too far gone to save, and you just walked in and saved all 4. "You did not mark them too far gone," Sephi said gently. "You marked them too far gone for what you had." Those are different sentences, and the difference is the most important thing in this work. The whole crime here belongs to the people who could have given you enough and chose not to. You held the line with a cup against the sea. Do not you dare carry the guilt that belongs to the people who would not bring you a bucket. Now come on, there are more rooms, and we have buckets to spare. On the second night, Win Patel found Lena resting at the edge of the receiving hall. The school teacher had come aboard with the last of her 400 children, all of them clean now, and she sat down on the bench without a word. "I have my stories back," Win said after a while. "The children want stories again, now that they are not afraid. I am going to tell them this one, when they are older. The ship that came, the day the begging finally got an answer. Some stories a people has to keep, or they forget what is possible, and then the next time the door is sealed, they do not even think to ask for it to be opened." "Tell it true," Lena said. "Tell them how long it took, and about the ones we lost before the ship came. Do not make it a story where help always comes in time. Tell them help came because somebody sent it, and somebody had to decide to, and the deciding is the whole of the thing." Win looked at her a long moment. "You are going with them," she said. "The human ship. I can see it on you." "I am," Lena said, surprised to find it was already entirely true. "I held a line with nothing for 11 days, and I will not go back to being someone who could not reach the rooms. For the rest of my life, I want to be on the side that has enough, so yes, I am going with them." Lena did not really sleep after that. They tried to make her, but she knew her people in a way the human medics could not yet, and she could move twice as fast through the convoy as a stranger, and somewhere in the second night, she stopped being a field medic holding a line with nothing, and started being something else. A bridge. The one person who stood with a foot in each world, the dying convoy, and the clean white ship, and carried people across. Somewhere in the first day of the cleansing, she found the man whose wife had the tide in both lungs, the one she had marked on the first day the long mercy came. His name was Errol, and his wife was named Brisa, and they had been married 30 years on the drift world, and Brisa had been one of the cases Lena had quietly given up on, because the tide in both lungs at that depth was a death, always, every time, in Lena's whole experience. Errol had not given up. Errol had sat by his wife in the crowded corridor for 11 days, holding her hand, talking to her, even when she could no longer answer, and Lena had passed him 100 times, and had never had the heart to tell him what she knew, which was that talking would not change it. She found him on the first day of the cleansing, because he came and found her, gripping her arm in the corridor with a strength that startled her. "They took Brisa to the big ship," he said. "The human medics. They took her to a deep ward. Lena, you have to tell me the truth. You are the only one here who will tell me the truth. Both her lungs. You marked her. I saw you mark her. Is the human ship going to be able to do anything, or are they just being kind to me before the end?" Lena looked at him, and for the first time in 11 days, she did not have to give the careful answer. The maybe, the we will see. She did not know for certain about Brisa. Both lungs at that depth was the hardest case there was, but she had spent the night watching the deep wards do things she had been taught were impossible, and she had earned the right, finally, to say something other than no. I do not know for certain, Errol, she said. I will not lie to you and say I do. Both lungs is the hardest there is. But I watched them bring back a case last night that I would have sworn was gone. A man with the tide in his blood. And he is sitting up this morning. I have stopped knowing what these people cannot do. So I am not going to tell you it is hopeless. Because I do not believe that anymore. And I have not been able to say that about anyone in 11 days. Go to the deep ward. Sit with her. Hold her hand the way you have been. It mattered before, and it matters now. And let the human medics work. And we will see. And this time when I say we will see, I mean there is something to see. It would be 8 days before Lena knew the end of that one. On the first day she only sent Errol to his wife's side, and watched him go at a run, an old man running through the clean, bright corridors of a ship that had come for people everyone else had written off, and she thought that if the Long Mercy did nothing else for the rest of its voyage, the sight of that one old man running toward hope, instead of away from death, would have been worth the 9 days it had taken to arrive. There was one part of the convoy that the human medics had been saving, and Lena knew before they told her which part it was. The back ships, the coffin ships, the cold dead hulls at the tail of the chain where the worst cases had been sent to die slow, because the tide grew slower in the cold, and that was the only mercy the convoy had been able to offer them. 1,100 people were in the back ships. By every rule Lena knew, by every number she had ever been taught, those people were already lost. You did not come back from a deep bloom. The tide that had been in someone for 11 days, growing in the cold, was a tide that had reached the lungs and the blood, and the deep places were where even the bright water could not follow. "Show me the back ships," Captain Marrow said, on the second night. She had come down off her command deck herself, in a clean white suit, to walk the convoy. "I want to see the hardest cases. Take me to the ones you wrote off." "We did not write them off," Lena said. "We just could not reach them. There is a difference. I want there to be a difference." "There is," Marrow said. "I know there is. Take me to them anyway." So Lena took the captain of the largest ship Earth had sent into the region, down the length of the lashed-together chain, all the way to the back, to the cold dead hulls, and she opened the airlocks she had been opening for 11 days, only to carry bodies out of, and she showed Marrow the worst of it, the deep bloom. People so far into the tide that the pale shroud had begun to grow over them while they still breathed. Men and women, and a terrible few, children, lying in the cold in rows, kept barely alive by the chill, and by the last of the bright water, and by the refusal of the medics to let go. Marrow walked the rows slowly. She knelt by a few. She did not flinch from the bloom, did not pull back from the pale shrouds, and when she had walked the whole cold length of the back ships, she stood for a while in silence, and then she keyed her suit channel. "Tar, bring the deep wards online. All of them. And bring the 1,100 back ship cases aboard, deepest first." A pause. "Yes, all of them. I know what the numbers say. Bring them anyway." "Captain," Lena said, very carefully, because she could not let herself hope wrong about this. Not about the back ships, not about the 1,100. These are deep bloom cases. 11 days in the cold. The tide is in the deep places. I have to ask you, plainly, because these are my people, and I have carried too many of them out of these rooms already. Can you actually save them, or are you only making them comfortable?" Marrow looked at her, and there was no false brightness in her tired face, none of the careful kindness that Lena had learned to read as a no. "The deep wards on the Long Mercy were built for exactly this," she said. "Not for the easy cases. The easy cases we could clean with a hand unit in a corridor. The deep wards are for the ones everyone else gives up on. Because the colonies that built this ship lost too many of their own people to the deep bloom in the early years, before they learned how, and they swore they would never lose another that way. It is slow. Some of these 1,100 will be in the deep wards for weeks. It will be hard, and it will hurt them, and a few of them are so far gone that even our deep wards will only be able to make the end gentle." She put a hand on Lena's shoulder. "But most of them, Calder, most of these 1,100 that you were taught to write off, most of them are going to walk off this ship. I will not promise you all. I will never promise you all, because the day a medic promises all is the day she has started lying. But I will promise you most. And most of 1,100, is a number you have been told for 11 days was 0. Lena had to step away then, into the cold dark of the back ship corridor, and stand for a moment with her hand over her mouth, because the thing rising in her chest was too big to let out in front of the captain. Most of 1100. She had carried 109 people out of these rooms in 11 days, and counted every one, and built a hard, cold place inside herself to hold the counting. And now the captain was standing in the worst room in the convoy saying most, and the hard, cold place was cracking, and she did not know what was going to come out of it. What came out, in the end, was work. It was always work. She turned back and she said, "Then let us start with the deepest. I know which ones. I have known for 11 days which ones were the furthest gone. Follow me." And she led the human crews into the cold, and began at last to carry her people, not into the dark, but out of it. It went on through the night, the carrying. Lena worked alongside the human crews, and she found that she knew every face, because she had been the one who marked each of them for the back ships in the first place, and now she was the one carrying them out. And the symmetry of it undid something in her that 11 days of grief had wound tight. A young human crewman beside her, lifting the other end of a stretcher, saw her face and understood it, the way the relief crews seemed always to understand. "You marked them," he said quietly, "and now you are unmarking them. That is the rarest thing in this work. Most of us never get to do it. Hold on to it." So Lena held on to it, the walking back, all through the cold night, until the back ships, the cold dead hulls she had been carrying bodies out of for 11 days, stood empty of everyone but the living, every one of them on their way to the light. Halloran, the deep ward steady-handed medic, walked Lena through the long quiet room full of soft blue light, where the cases the convoy had thought were lost lay still under the slow machines, while the light did its patient work. It was not dramatic. Lena had imagined a fight, something fierce. Instead, the deep ward was the calmest place on the ship, and the work of saving the unsavable turned out to be a matter of patience more than power. "People think the deep bloom is unbeatable because they meet it with speed," Halloran said. "You cannot outrace the tide, but it has one weakness. It cannot wait. It is greedy, always reaching for the next warm place before it has secured the last, and a body held steady in the light gives it nowhere new to reach, and so it starves. We do not beat the tide by being stronger than it. We beat it by being more patient than it, and there is nothing more patient than a people who have decided a particular person is going to live." The deepest case in the convoy was a boy of 7 named Tomas, whose mother had carried him onto the Sparrow Line at the Driftworld Fall and had died of the tide on the 4th day, and who had been in the back ships for 9 days, with the bloom so deep in him that the pale shroud had begun at his hairline and his fingertips both at once. Lena had checked on him every day. Every day she had expected him to be gone, and every day he had still been there, breathing slow in the cold, and she had not been able to say why, except that some people did not let go, even when the letting go would have been easier, and the boy was one of those. She carried Tomas aboard the Long Mercy herself, in her own arms, through the clean, bright corridors to the deep ward, and she stayed while they put him under the cold blue light and the slow, careful machines, and Halloran, the same steady-handed deep ward medic who had walked her through the room, looked at the boy, and then looked at the chart, and then looked at Lena. "How long has he been at this depth?" Halloran asked. 9 days, Lena said. "He should have been gone on the 2nd. I do not know why he is still here." Halloran looked at the boy for a long moment. "I have seen this before," she said quietly. "Not often, the very young ones, sometimes, the ones who have already lost everything. They hold on past all reason, as if they are waiting for someone to come. We used to think it was nothing, a trick of the readings. We do not think that anymore." She adjusted the blue light. "He waited, this one. Whatever he was waiting for, you brought it. He is going to be all right, medic. It will take time. But he waited well, and you came in time, and between the two of you, it is going to be enough." The Sparrow Line was clean on the 4th day. It happened so quietly that Lena almost missed the moment. She was in the deep ward, where she now spent most of her hours, when a tech she had come to know, the one who had cleared the thread from under Posey's eye, found her and said, simply, "The last hull just read clear. The convoy is clean, Calder. All 212 ships. There is no living tide left in the Sparrow line. Lena set down the chart she was holding and stood very still. For 11 days, and then 4 more, the tide had been the air she breathed. It had been in every wall, and every lung, and every hour. It had been the thing she measured all her work against, the rising water she had been bailing against with a cup, and now a tech was standing in front of her saying that it was gone, that the cup had won, that the water had gone down, and finally to nothing, and she found that she did not know how to hold the fact in her hands. It was too large and too light at the same time. She had braced so long against the weight of the tide that its sudden absence nearly knocked her over. "Show me," she said. "I have to see it. I have to walk the back ships and see them clean." So she walked the convoy one more time, the whole length of the lashed-together chain, and it was not the convoy she had walked for 11 days. The corridors that had been thick with bloom were clean and bare, the pale shrouds gone, the gray walls scrubbed back to honest metal. The families that had slept stacked in the corridors waiting to die were awake and moving, some of them already gathering their few things, because the word was running through the chain again, the way it had run on the first day. Only the word was different now. We are clean. We are going to live. We are going home, except there was no home. The drift world was gone, but there would be somewhere. The human ship was talking about a place, a world on the far side of the tide, where the colonies that built the Long Mercy lived, a place that took in the ones the region wrote off, and the word for that place ran through the convoy, like water through a dry field. She walked all the way to the back ships, to the cold dead hulls that had been coffins, and she opened the airlocks, and the rooms were empty. Not empty, the way they had been empty after she carried a body out. Empty, because everyone in them had been carried, alive, to the deep wards, and the rooms stood cold and bare and clean. And Lena stood in the worst room in the convoy, the room she had walked into expecting the dead every day for 11 days, and there was no one left to mourn in it, and she put her back against the clean, cold wall, and slid down it to the floor, and sat there a long time, and let herself feel, finally, the thing she had not let herself feel since the drift world fell, which was that it was over, and that she had not lost, and that most of her people were going to live. The region turned, in those days, faster than anyone had expected. It turned because the whole of it had watched. The open band Marrow had broadcast on had carried the entire thing to 100 worlds, the begging convoy, the blue glow, the cleansing, the sodality blockade, the gray wall of warships, the long plain answer Marrow had given on every band, and then it had carried the cleansing of the convoy, day by day, 212 ships going from gray to clean, and the back ships emptying, and the deep wards filling, and then, one by one, emptying too, as the deep cases came back from the place everyone had been told there was no coming back from. The region had spent 20 years being told the tide could not be beaten, and then the region had watched it be beaten, in real time, by a hospital and a fleet that had come for 38,000 people no one else would cross the lane for. The choir came first. They had backed away from the convoy at the start, had moved their picket ships further out and called it their answer, and now, with the whole region watching, and the fear they had traded on dying in front of everyone, the choir found that they had a different answer after all. A choir envoy ship came in, carefully, under a flag of parley, and asked, with as much dignity as it could manage, whether the colonies that had built the Long Mercy might be willing to share the suppression technology with the wider region after all, now that circumstances had clarified. It was the same technology the region had refused for free 20 years before. Marrow received the envoy politely, and told it that the colonies had always been willing to share it, that they had never been the ones who sealed the door, and that any world in the region that wanted to fight the tide instead of fearing it would find the colonies glad of the help. The choir envoy left looking like a creature that had bet everything on the wrong horse, and was only now reading the racing form. The sodality did not come. The sodality sealed their lane and said nothing, and that silence was the loudest thing in the region, because every world that had been paying the sodality's quarantine tolls and resettlement contracts had now seen, with its own eyes, what those tolls had been buying, which was the door kept shut on people who could have been saved. Lena heard, later, that 3 of the worlds inside the sodality's own border had stopped paying within the month, and that the sodality's careful speech about granting permission had become, across the region, a kind of grim joke. The thing you said when a powerful person was caught doing wrong and pretended they had meant to all along. The Sodality had brought 60 warships to stop one hospital, and they had not fired a shot, and they had lost anyway, more completely than any battle could have cost them, because they had lost the one thing they had truly been selling, which was the fear, and you could not get the fear back once 100 worlds had watched it die. Marrow had said it during the standoff, on the command deck, and she had been right. We just had to turn the light on. And the light, once turned on, did not stop with one convoy. A signal came in on the open band from a small mining colony called Tarn, 4 lanes away, a place that had been paying the Sodality's tolls for 19 years and watching its own neighbors fall. Tarn had a bloom forming at the edge of its system, and Tarn had watched the whole of the Sparrow Line broadcast, and now Tarn was asking, one people to another, for the light. Marrow answered it herself and told the colony that the light had always been free, that it would be given to any world that asked, on the single condition that the world turn around and give it to the next. The light moved outward, hand to hand, or it did not move at all. We will send you a ship, Marrow said. Not this one. This one has a convoy to take home, but another, because there have always been more than one of us. And Lena, listening, understood that this was the real shape of what the Long Mercy had done. It had not saved one convoy. It had broken a lie a whole region had lived inside for 20 years. And the lie broke the way a dam breaks, with worlds pouring through the gap, and no power in the region could put it back, because you could not make a people unsee a thing they had watched with their own eyes. Lena went to see the girl named Posey, on the day the convoy was declared clean. The girl was in a recovery ward on the Long Mercy, sitting up, the pale thread under her eye long gone, the skin there clean and ordinary, and when she saw Lena, she got a serious look on her face. The same serious look she had worn when she asked, on the first day, whether the human ship had real doctors, or just more people like Lena, who tried hard and were sorry. You came onto the big ship with me, Posey said. You held my hand the whole way, I remember. I did, Lena said. The real doctors fixed me, Posey said, but you got me to them. That is a different job. Somebody had to do the getting. She considered this with the gravity of a 9-year-old who had thought about it a great deal. When I grow up, I am going to do the getting. The getting is the part I can do. Lena had to laugh, which she had not done in a long time, and the laugh turned into something with water in it, and she sat on the edge of the bed and let the girl hold her hand for a while, the getting and the gotten, the two of them on the right side at last of a door that had very nearly stayed shut. The boy named Tomas took longer. He had been the deepest case in the convoy, 9 days, at a depth that should have killed him on the second, and the deep ward kept him for 3 weeks, under the slow blue light and the careful machines, and there were 2 nights, when the medic named Halloran went very quiet, and Lena sat by the boy's bed and did not leave. But the boy had waited 9 days in the cold for someone to come, and he did not let go now that someone had, and on the 22nd day, he opened his eyes and asked, in a small clear voice, whether his mother was there. And Lena had to tell him the truth, that his mother had gone, on the 4th day, before the ship came. The boy took the truth the way the very young sometimes do, all at once, and then folded away somewhere to be taken out later. And then he asked the second question, which was whether he was going to die too, and Lena was able, this time, to give him the answer she had not been able to give anyone for 11 days. No, she said, you are not going to die, Tomas. You held on long enough. The ship came. You are going to live, and you are going to grow up, and you are going to do whatever you want with all the years you nearly did not get. That is a promise, and I do not make that promise unless I can keep it. I learned that from a captain. The boy thought about this. Where will I live? He asked. My world is gone. There is a place, Lena said, on the far side of the tide. The people who built this ship live there. They take in the ones the region writes off, because they have been written off themselves, a long time ago, and they remember it. You are going there, with the rest of us, and I am going to be there too, so you will not be going alone. None of us are going alone. That part is over. There was one more thread that Lena had carried through the whole of the cleansing, the one she had not let herself hope about, and it ended on the 8th day. She was passing the deep wards on her rounds, when she saw the old man named Errol sitting by a bed, holding a hand, the way he had held it in the crowded corridor for 11 days, and she stopped, because the woman in the bed had her eyes open. Brisa, who had the tide in both lungs, who was the hardest case there was, who Lena had quietly given up on the first day, was awake, and breathing, slow and shallow but on her own, and she was looking at her husband's face, and he was talking to her, the way he had talked to her when she could not answer, except now she could. The deep ward medic, Halloran, came to stand beside Lena in the doorway. Both lungs, Lena said. I marked her on the first day. Both lungs at that depth is a death. I have never once seen it go the other way. You have now, Halloran said simply. She will carry scarring. She will be slow to breathe deep for the rest of her life, and she will not run anywhere ever again, and on cold mornings she will feel it. But she is going to have those cold mornings. Medic, and a great many of them, with that man beside her. We do not get them all. I told you we do not, and I meant it, and there were 2 in the deep wards we lost this week, and I will carry them. But, we got that one, the hardest case in your convoy, and we got her, and her husband is going to take her home. Halloran was quiet a moment. 30 years they had together before the fall. They are going to get the rest of them after all. That is what the ship is for. That, right there, is the whole of what the ship is for. Lena did not go in. She did not want to break the thing that was happening in that room. She only stood in the doorway a moment longer, watching an old man talk to his wife who was supposed to be dead, and then she went on with her rounds. And she found that the weight she had been carrying since the first day, the weight of Brisa marked and given up, had lifted off her so completely that she felt, for a few steps down the bright corridor, almost weightless, as though she might drift up off the deck entirely, if she did not hold on to something. When the Long Mercy finally turned for home, 3 weeks after it had come over the horizon, it carried the whole of the Sparrow line with it, 38,000 survivors of a world that had fallen, and of the 1,100 deep cases that every rule said were already dead, 940 walked aboard on their own feet. Lena knew the number because she counted it, the way she had counted the 109 she lost, and she found that the new number did not crack the hard cold place inside her after all. It filled it. 940 people who had been written off, walking. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was the thing she would carry for the rest of her life, the way she had carried the 109, except this one she could carry in the light. Captain Marrow found her at a viewport on the last day, looking back at the dead system where the convoy had crawled and begged and very nearly died. You are coming with us, Marrow said. It was not a question. Tar told me. You have signed on. Field Medic, Long Mercy. I have, Lena said. I do not have anywhere else to be, and I want to learn how you do it. Not the field generator, the other thing. The thing where you fly toward the fire instead of away. I held a line for 11 days because I did not know how to do anything else, and it nearly broke me. I want to learn how to do it without it breaking me, the way your people do. Marrow was quiet for a moment, looking out at the dead system with her. I will let you in on the secret of it, she said at last. It is not that it does not break us. It breaks us all. A little, every time. The ones who feel nothing flying into the fire are no good in the deep wards, because you cannot carry a frightened child gently if you cannot feel that they are frightened. It breaks us, and we let it. And then we get up the next morning and fly toward the next fire anyway, because the alternative is to be the people who sealed the door, and we have been on the wrong side of too many sealed doors to ever become the ones who shut them. That is the whole of the secret, Calder. There is no trick to it. You just decide, over and over, every single day, that no number of people is a small number, and then you go and get them. You already know how. You did it for 11 days, with nothing but your own 2 hands. You have been one of us a lot longer than you have had the uniform. The Long Mercy drove out of the dead system with the dawn of its drives, a clean white spine 3 kilometers long, with 38,000 saved souls aboard, and a gray wall of warships folded around it that had never fired a shot, and it left behind a region that would never again quite believe the thing it had been told for 20 years, that the door had to stay shut, that some people were a containment event, that running was the only wisdom. Lena Calder stood at a viewport and watched the dead system fall away behind, and the girl who would grow up to do the getting was asleep in a clean bed 2 decks down, and the boy who had waited 9 days in the cold was alive and going to a place that would take him in, and the hard, cold counting place inside her had a new number in it now, a number that the whole region had been told was 0, and the number was 940, and it was warm, and she could carry it in the light. She did not weep. She had no need to anymore. She only stood and watched the dark go clean and black and empty behind the ship, the way the captain had told her it would, and breathed the air that smelled of nothing, and let herself believe, for the first time since the drift world fell, that the door was going to stay open now, because somebody had finally come, in a ship too big to be afraid, and turned the light on, and shown a whole frightened region that the thing they had run from all those years had only ever been a plant, and that the cure had been a choice the entire time. On the last day of the crossing home, the colony's world came up in the forward windows, and the whole ship, crew, and convoy alike came to the windows to see it, because the convoy had not seen a living world since the drift world fell, and many of the children had never seen one at all. It was a blue and green world, ringed with quiet traffic, the cities glowing warm along its night side, and there was no pale shroud anywhere on it, only a clean living world that had once been told it was a containment event and had refused to believe it. Lena stood at the window with the girl named Posey on one side and the boy named Tomas on the other, the boy holding her hand because he was not quite ready to walk into a new world without holding on to something, and the three of them watched it grow larger in the glass. "Is that where we are going to live?" Tomas asked. "That is where we are going to live," Lena said. "It is not gone," the boy said, with a child's directness, as though he had needed to say it out loud to make it true. "It is a world, and it is not gone. There can be worlds that are not gone." "There can," Lena said, and had to stop for a moment, because the boy had said, in 7 words, the whole of the things she had crossed a ruined region and lost a green world to learn. All it took was somebody willing to build the light and somebody willing to carry it, and she had decided, watching a clean world come up with a saved child's hand in hers, that she was going to be both, for the rest of her life, however many small worlds were still out there begging into the dark for one doctor. The colonies came up to meet the Long Mercy and did not treat the convoy as refugees to be processed. They treated them as people coming home because they had all of them, or their parents before them, been on the wrong side of a sealed door once, and had built their whole world around the promise that no one who reached them would ever be on the wrong side of one again. 38,000 survivors of a fallen world came down onto a living world that opened its arms, and the children who had never seen a sky ran out under one for the first time, and Lena watched them run, and thought that there were worse things to spend a life on than this, and that there was, in the end, nothing better.